Jimmy Fallon shocked when Will Smith suddenly freezes after hearing this familiar voice. Will Smith stopped talking mid-sentence, turned his head toward the speaker, and went completely still. Not a pause, not a reaction. He just stopped, the way a person stops when they hear something that should not exist anymore, something they had quietly accepted was gone forever. Jimmy Fallon leaned forward. 300 people in that studio held their breath. The voice kept playing. It was a Thursday in November. The Tonight Show had its full house, every seat taken, the kind of electricity that fills a room when someone at the absolute peak of the cultural universe walks in. Will Smith was there to talk about everything and nothing. The wide-ranging conversation that only happens when a guest has been in the business long enough to have stories worth telling, and the charisma to make everyone feel like it's the first time. He came out the way he always does, the smile first, then everything else. Arms wide, working the crowd before he reached the chair, comfortable in the room the way very few people are genuinely comfortable in a room. The interview was flowing. They talked about his childhood in Philadelphia. They talked about his sons. Jimmy had him laughing inside the first 2 minutes, which is no small thing because Will Smith's laugh, the real one, not the performance laugh, is one of the most contagious sounds in human history. Everything was easy. Everything was warm. The segment producer later said she had spent 17 years in late-night television and had never once seen Will Smith go quiet like that. Then, Jimmy reached under the desk. He pulled out a small handheld recorder. Old, the kind made in the late 1970s. Plastic housing, a single red record button worn smooth from use, a small silver speaker grill along the front edge. Not digital. Not restored, not cleaned up or remastered, just a recording, rough around the edges. The way sound is when it hasn't been touched in 46 years. Jimmy pressed play. A voice came out of that recorder, a woman's voice, warm and slightly low, with a particular unhurried cadence of someone who has never once been in a hurry to get to the point, because the point will keep. Will Smith heard the first 3 words and stopped. His head turned toward the recorder the way a compass turns. Not a choice, not a performance. Just an orientation. Something in him pointed toward that sound before the rest of him had finished understanding what it was. His eyes went wide. His jaw closed. His hands, which had been moving with the easy expressiveness of a man who talks with his whole body, settled completely still in his lap. Jimmy said quietly, "Will?" Smith didn't answer. The entire studio froze. Wrong assumptions spread through that audience like electricity through water. Was he ill? Had something gone wrong? The recording, was it bad news? Was this something that should have been checked first? Something that had slipped through? Something nobody had thought to warn him about? He was 56 years old and suddenly looked, for just a moment, like someone much younger than that. 300 people held their breath. Will Smith closed his eyes. When he opened them, there were tears on his face, not building, not threatening, just already there. The way tears appear on a face that has been ambushed. His voice barely above a whisper, but caught perfectly by his microphone, he said one word. Miss Carroll. To understand what happened next, you need to understand what happened in 1974. Will Smith wasn't always Will Smith, the Fresh Prince, the global icon, the man who fills every room he enters from wall to wall. In the spring of 1974, Will Smith was 5 years old and growing up in Winnefield, West Philadelphia, a neighborhood of close streets, row houses with white marble steps, and the particular density of community that comes from everyone knowing everyone. His mother, Caroline, worked hard. His father, Willard, worked hard. The family was intact and loved and held together with the discipline and faith that was the architecture of that house. But there was a woman on the block named Carol Simmons. Carol was 43 years old. She had taught piano and voice at a small music school on Lancaster Avenue for 11 years. She lived alone in a row house 4 doors down from the Smiths and spent every Saturday afternoon with her front door open and a record playing. Motown, soul, the occasional jazz record that drifted out onto the sidewalk and pulled children in like a current. Will Smith was one of those children. He was 5 the first time he walked through her open door following the sound of a Marvin Gaye record and found himself standing in a small living room lined with records and a scarred upright piano against the far wall. Carol Simmons was sitting at the piano with her back to the door, playing along with a record from memory, and she did not turn around. She just said, "Close the door. You're letting the cold in." He closed the door. He sat on the floor. He listened. He came back the next Saturday. And the one after that. By the time he was 7, Carol had started asking him to sing along, not performing, not learning, just joining the sound. A voice needed to understand it belonged in a room before it could fill one. She was teaching him something that had no name yet. She was the first person who told him he had it. Not talent, not a gift. Something she called the thing that makes people stop. She said it on an afternoon in the autumn of 1976, when he had been singing along to a Stevie Wonder record, and she had stopped playing mid-bar, turned on the bench, and looked at him the way of someone confirming something they suspected. "You have the thing that makes people stop," she said. "Don't waste it on things that don't deserve it." He was 8 years old. He kept coming back every Saturday. In 1978, Carol Simmons was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. She was 47. She told no one for 3 months, not because she was ashamed, but because she did not want to spend the time that remained being someone's sad story. She kept teaching. She kept the front door open on Saturdays. She did, on one Saturday in October of 1978, pull out the small handheld recorder she used to tape students' performances so they could hear themselves. She asked Will, who was 10 years old and sitting on the floor the way he always sat, back against the couch, legs crossed, if he would sing something for her. Not to practice, just so she would have it. He sang a Stevie Wonder song. He sang it the way a 10-year-old sings, earnestly, imperfectly, with everything. Carol recorded it. Then she turned off the recorder and said, "When you're older and you forget what it felt like to do something just because it was true, play that back." Carol Simmons died in March of 1979. She was 48 years old. Will Smith was 10. He stood at the back of the service in a church on 52nd Street with his mother's hand in his, and understood for the first time the specific weight of losing someone who had seen something in you before you could see it yourself. He did not know what happened to the recorder. He thought about Miss Carol on the night he performed at the Grammys for the first time. He thought about her when his first album went platinum. He thought about her every time he stood in the wings before something large and felt the thing she had described, the thing that makes people stop. Her niece, a woman named Denise, found the recorder in a box in Carol's storage unit while settling the estate of Carol's last surviving sister. The recorder was wrapped in a cloth. There was a small index card inside. Will, age 10. October 1978. Denise had spent 6 weeks finding the right address for The Tonight Show. She did not ask to meet Will Smith. She asked only that the recording reach him before she was gone. Denise had been diagnosed with stage 4 breast cancer in August. She had been given months. She wanted, she wrote, to close the loop her aunt had opened. Will Smith's assistant called Denise within 24 hours of the letter arriving. The arrangement was made quietly. Tonight show staff were told only that a specific guest would be in the audience. They were not told what she had carried from a storage unit in West Philadelphia to a studio in Rockefeller Plaza. Denise was in row 3, center aisle, wearing a green scarf her aunt had given her in 1978. She had come with her daughter, Yvonne. She believed she was there to watch a taping. She did not know the recorder had been given to Jimmy that morning. She did not know that Will Smith had listened to it twice in his dressing room before the show and had needed a few minutes alone afterward. Smith had asked for one thing, that Denise not be told what was coming. He wanted her to feel like a person, not a moment. Behind the scenes, Will Smith had made a decision that defied every producer's expectation. He had told Jimmy 30 minutes before taping. No segment plan. No talking points. No prepared response. Just play it. Whatever happened would happen on live television in front of 300 people, and that was exactly right. Because Miss Carroll had always said the only performances that mattered were the ones you couldn't plan your way through. But this is the moment no one in the studio and no one watching at home ever saw coming. Will Smith said Miss Carroll, and the recording was still playing in the room, her voice, warm and unhurried, saying something so ordinary that it made everything stop. He opened his eyes. He looked at Jimmy. Jimmy didn't say anything. He looked out at the audience. He looked at row 3. Will Smith followed his gaze. A woman in a green scarf was sitting very still in the 3rd row, center aisle. Not young. Not performing. Sitting the way ordinary people sit when they have traveled a long way on very little energy to be somewhere that mattered to someone else. Will Smith looked at her for a long moment. Denise, it came out like a confirmation. The word of a man who has just recognized the shape of something he has been carrying for 46 years. In row 3, Denise looked up at the stage. Her daughter reached for her hand. She stood. Will Smith was off the stage before Jimmy had finished processing it. He didn't descend the aisle steps the way a performer descends. He came off fast, already moving, already across the 1st row, and he stopped in the aisle at row 3 and looked at Denise straight on. Jimmy Fallon stood at the edge of the stage and pressed both hands to his face. He stood there for a moment. Then he stepped down and stood at the end of the aisle and just watched. "Folks," he said, his voice breaking clean in half on the 2nd word, "I think we need to let this happen." In the control room, the director did not call for a cut to commercial. The cameraman closest to the stage did not look away. Questlove set down his drumsticks and stood up. Will Smith reached for Denise's hands. She was thinner than she should have been. He could see it. She was standing with the particular effort of someone who has decided that standing is what this moment requires, and nothing is going to stop her from doing it. "She kept it," he said. His voice was low. "She wrote my name on a card. She never threw anything away," Denise said. Her hands were shaking in his. "She talked about you, even at the end. She said you were going to make people stop. She told me that. She was right." He reached into his jacket, the recorder. He held it out toward Denise with both hands. "I can't keep this," he said. Denise shook her head. "She kept it 40 years for you. Then you keep it 40 years for her." Denise looked at the recorder. She looked at Will Smith's face. "She would have liked you," Denise said. "The real you. Not the famous one." His jaw tightened. He nodded once. "I'm still trying to be him," he said. "The real one." The standing ovation started from the back of the house. One person, then a section, then the whole room rising like a tide, row by row from the back until every person in that studio was on their feet. and Will Smith was kneeling in the row 3 aisle with both of Denise's hands in his, and the recorder sat on the armrest of her seat between them. And the room was so loud and so full of something that it stopped feeling like a television studio entirely. Share and subscribe. Make sure this story is never forgotten. 9 weeks later, on a Tuesday morning in January, Denise passed away at home in Philadelphia, surrounded by her daughter and 2 grandchildren. She was 61 years old. She had carried her aunt's things with the same care her aunt had carried everything, carefully, without complaint, because some things are worth the wait. The recorder was in her daughter Yvonne's keeping. Yvonne had it restored, not altered, not cleaned up, just stabilized so the tape would not decay further. Will Smith did not speak at Denise's service. He sat in the 5th row. He wore no jewelry, no sunglasses, nothing that announced him. Several people recognized him. No one said anything, because the room understood, without being told, that he was not there as Will Smith. He was there as a 10-year-old boy who had sat on Miss Carroll's floor on Saturday afternoons and learned that a voice needed to belong in a room before it could fill one. At the reception, Will asked Yvonne if she had a photograph of Carol Simmons. She found one on her phone. Carol at the piano, 1977, back straight, head tilted, playing something whose name Yvonne didn't know. Will Smith looked at it for a long time. Then he said, "She looks exactly like her voice. Some people hear you before you exist. And if you're lucky, the sound of them stays."